Okay, so we've all seen the footage, right? I mean, the research is out there, the drone sightings, dragons, well, they're not myth anymore. They're real. And today, we're going to rewind a bit, go back to the very start and take a look at, how we first started to actually understand them. We'll be using firsthand accounts to do this, some pretty incredible early research.
Yeah, exactly. I know a lot of you have been asking about these early diary entries. You want to know what it was like back then, like when scientists first, really started to wrap their heads around these amazing creatures.
Yeah, what were the big observations? The things that really began to paint the picture of, well, dragons.
Right.
So we've got, well, they're famous now, of course, but some excerpts from the three real dragon diaries and also the field diary of Dr. Evelyn Moreau.
Right.
Both, well, they provide kind of these parallel viewpoints, on those same groundbreaking events as they happened over there in the Altai region.
Yeah, and I think what we'll try to do today is dig into those first observations, the aha moments, I guess you could say, when it all started to become clear, well, clearer at least, and also just, try to understand those first hypotheses that came out of those early encounters.
All right, so let's go all the way back, March 15th, 2025. Both diaries point to that footage from the Altai region. You know the one. It was, well, everything changed. We went from speculation to, proof.
And it's really interesting to go back and see how the experts reacted. You see phrases like still processing and confirmation. This was huge for these people, for researchers who had spent their whole careers, looking into this possibility. It really was a turning point.
Absolutely. And beyond that feeling of, well, validation, the diaries also talk about the immediate, the practical stuff, like getting those first findings to Cambridge super fast,
Yep.
and then that really crucial part, requesting those long-term research permits from, well, the Mongolian government and all the others involved. Can
Yeah.
you imagine the,
Yeah.
the diplomacy, the
Yeah.
paperwork?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, setting up a whole research station in that kind of environment, so remote, so challenging, the terrain, the weather, it was a massive, massive undertaking. And Moreau's diary that day, she writes, "The science is irrefutable and the implications are immense." I mean, that really sums up the feeling. This was serious.
It was. And just a few weeks later, April 3rd, 2025, the teams are on the ground. They set up their first base camp, about 40 kilometers from that initial sighting. It's amazing how quickly satellite imaging came into play, already showing increased activity in a particular valley ridge, just north of their position.
Right. It shows you how from the very beginning they were combining, being there on the ground with all the tech they had. And the diaries show how quickly those early hypotheses started to form. Moreau, for instance, she was all about the anatomy, suggesting wings built for gliding long distances. And as we know now, she was right on the money early on about how they fly.
And Caldwell, well, the diary show he was already digging into the really mysterious stuff, like could they have some kind of advanced way of regulating their temperature? And maybe even some unique metabolic processes. That basic question, how do these huge heat-generating creatures actually work? It seems that was a major focus from day one.
Oh, totally. In her diary, Moreau mentions Thorne working on flight mechanics. And Caldwell, well, he's deep into those thermoregulation theories, how dragons create and, more importantly, control all that heat. It's fascinating, isn't it? These early research paths, they really laid the groundwork for everything we know now about dragon physiology.
They did. Then we have May 17th, 2025, the first time the research teams actually see a dragon with their own eyes, after that initial public footage, of course. It happened at night. A thermal imaging signature, that's what ticked them off. And the way the diaries describe it is pretty captivating, the sound of wings, and then suddenly, there it is. A huge dragon on an outcrop, maybe 400 meters away.
And they all mention the eyes, that intelligent, assessing gaze. It wasn't just looking at an animal. It was this feeling of mutual awareness, being observed right back. The diaries really emphasize how still the team was, just silently recording this incredible moment.
And then, poof, gone,
Mm.
just like that. In her diary, Moreau writes, breath held.
Mm.
It really captures that feeling of awe and maybe a little bit of fear of the unknown. That description of the wing folding, that intelligent look. Those are details that really stick with you.
They do, and I think these firsthand accounts show us that shift from theoretical models to actually seeing it with their own eyes. It made it real, in a very powerful way.
Yeah. And moving into summer that year, August 9th, 2025, the teams are starting to see patterns in dragon behavior. They discovered these distinct territorial markers, patches of charred rock. That was big. Their first hypothesis was a kind of directed thermal exhalation. It was a huge step forward in understanding what dragons could do.
Absolutely. This wasn't just body heat, you know? This meant they could somehow intentionally project heat. And the discussions between Moreau and Caldwell about whether it was for defense or maybe some kind of mating display, it shows how they were trying to figure out dragon behavior. Comparing it to what we know about animals, but also realizing that dragons could be completely unique.
And the diaries mention how badly they wanted to get samples, but also the obvious danger. Getting close to these powerful creatures, it shows how careful they were, how much respect they had for these animals right from the start.
Moreau's diary entry that day, she calls it a groundbreaking discovery, this confirmation of controlled heat projection. She also mentions Thorne leaning towards the mating display idea, while Caldwell sticking with the defensive function. These debates, they were essential, for really refining their understanding.
Totally. And then, by December 21st, 2025, just a few months later, another huge discovery. They confirm nesting behavior. Remote drone footage shows a sheltered alcove, and inside, at least 3 young dragons. The way they describe the mother is pretty amazing.
Impressive specimen, scales shimmering like molten bronze. I mean, it's not just scientific data, is it? It's awe. And confirming reproduction, social structures, the possibility of family bonds, it was a game changer. It meant they weren't just studying individuals, they were looking at a whole population, a society.
And as the diaries make clear, it immediately raised those questions about conservation. The fact that these huge creatures had stayed hidden for so long, well, it suggested they might be vulnerable to us, to human activity. The ethical side of things, it was becoming more and more important.
Moreau writes that day about the mother, calling her an awe-inspiring presence. And she specifically talks about breeding, social structure, and the urgent need to think about conservation. It's clear they felt the weight of this responsibility. They knew they were dealing with something really special.
They did. And then the following spring, around May 5th, 2026, they start to focus more on the younger dragons. It seems the juveniles, especially one called D3, were a bit more, well, curious about the research teams.
Yeah, they were interacting more, even if it was from a distance, and it gave the researchers new opportunities to observe them. They used things like remote scent dispersion, introduced harmless pheromones. It was all about trying to, gently influence their behavior, understand them better, without being intrusive.
Moreau's diary mentions D3 approaching within 30 meters a few times. It sounds like she was hopeful that they might be able to get even closer. You can sense that cautious optimism in her writing.
And that makes sense, right? It was all about being careful, taking things slowly. Observation was key, and always using non-invasive methods.
Then by October 14th, 2026, things take a big turn. D3 lets them get much closer, within 10 meters, before backing off. And that, combined with all the detailed notes they'd been taking on its behavior, led to a major realization. These creatures were intelligent.
The diaries describe these behaviors as indicative of problem solving, manipulating objects, interacting with their environment in a way that suggested, well, thinking. It wasn't just instinct, it was something more. They realized they weren't dealing with just another unknown animal.
And the diaries are very clear about this shift in thinking. From an unknown species to, well, a sentient being, they knew the ethical implications were huge now, and that any future research, especially if it involved controlled environments, had to be done with the utmost care.
Moreau writes about that day, about how significant D3's close approach was. The cognitive implications were undeniable at that point, and they were recording every detail of these problem-solving behaviors. The ethical side of things, of studying an intelligent being, it became central to their work.
Right. Which brings us to February 28th, 2027, and the really tough decision to try relocating a dragon. The plan was to set up a secure habitat near Lake Baikal, to study them in more detail, but always with the goal of eventually returning them to their natural environment.
And Moreau starts a sentence in her diary, captivity is not the... We don't know what she was going to say, but it's clear they weren't looking to, imprison these animals. They wanted to create a safe space for observation, something as close to their natural habitat as possible. And the goal was always to reintroduce them. They chose D3 because, well, he was most comfortable around humans.
But the diaries are very honest about the risks, stress, the possibility that the dragon could react in unpredictable ways. They repeatedly say they have to be incredibly cautious.
It was a balancing act. They wanted to learn as much as possible, but they knew they had to do it ethically. They had to minimize any potential harm or distress.
And 3 months later, on June 11th, 2027, we get an update from the research facility. D3's initial adjustment was rough, but after a couple of weeks, his curiosity took over, and they made some truly amazing discoveries.
Yeah, confirming that vocal mimicry, that was big. It suggested they could communicate in a complex way, maybe even with other species. Learning about their diet, wild ungulates, and certain high-protein plants, that was vital too. It helped them understand their needs.
But the most shocking thing, as the diaries detail it, came from their neural scans when D3 was dreaming. They showed incredibly complex cognitive activity, possibly even sapient levels of processing. I mean, that's a huge leap forward in understanding how intelligent they are.
It really is. It suggests their intelligence isn't limited to, waking life. They're thinking, processing, even when they're asleep.
And finally, December 25th, 2027, a breakthrough moment. D3 responds to direct nonverbal cues. He solves a puzzle. The diaries describe D3 manipulating these three interlocking objects, figuring out how to get them in the right order to get to a food reward.
And it wasn't just, basic training. This showed genuine understanding of cause and effect. He was analyzing the problem, coming up with a solution. They knew this was cognitive reasoning, no doubt about it.
And one of the diary entries talks about what it means to be studying a creature that was once, well, a myth, a legend. And now here they are, proving how intelligent they really are. And the author ends with this powerful question. Knowing what we now know, what does the future hold? It sums it all up perfectly, doesn't it? How much our understanding changed and how crucial the ethical considerations are.
It really does. From that first undeniable proof to witnessing a dragon, thinking, reasoning, those first few years were a whirlwind of discovery.
So for everyone listening, I know you wanted to know about those early days. And as you can see, it was a time of intense learning, constant discovery. Those first observations about dragon biology and behavior, they led to that incredible realization. These creatures are intelligent. And with that came a huge responsibility.
Those aha moments. Seeing the intelligence in their eyes, understanding that controlled heat projection, the nesting behavior, and then, of course, D3 solving that puzzle, it all forced us to rethink everything we thought we knew about the natural world.
These diary entries, they're just a snapshot, the very beginning of our relationship with dragons. And now that we know they're here, well, the big question is, what does it mean for us? What new questions are going to come up as we continue to interact with them? It's something we all need to think about.
It is. It really is.